we approach that very materiality. Because computers allow us now to understand 1 million cultural artifacts in about 5 minutes. At the same time, because of the combination of computation with network technology, we are able to also present the results of our research to the world in a completely different way than through the old mechanisms of print distribution. I come from the Dominican Republic. I know a little bit about the history of libraries in the Dominican Republic. We used donkeys back in the day to take books to the different provinces of the Dominican Republic. Now, I heard recently that this was actually how the collection of Thomas Jefferson was carried to Washington to form the basis of the Library of Congress, donkeys. After donkeys, we had trucks, airplanes, carrying the print all over the world. All kinds of problems arose, of course, in these voyages. I don't have to, here in the Caribbean, remind ourselves of the problems that came with those early print operations that came from Europe during the 16th century, and the effect it had on the world and on our people and our ancestors. Now, with the internet, we have a new mode, completely new mode of distributing our work, our texts, our images, our videos, our sounds. Now, the digital humanities is one way of looking at the digital humanities is this. What happens when you try to do the work of scholarship in the humanities in this new hybrid world in which the distribution of print has not stopped, nor its production. We continue to pulp our research, but now must coexist with bytes, electrons turned on and off, traveling close to the speed of light sometimes to this fiber optic cables across the ocean. And of course, knowing now today that because of these bytes, we are also able to read 1,000 novels without reading a single one. I mean, it's almost impossible to avoid the observation that our kids are walking around in the streets with cell phones. Our teenagers are walking around the streets with cell phones and playing video games instead of playing with each other in the backyard. And I speak from my experience in the Dominican Republic. And this is what I see there. But I've also seen it all around the Caribbean. And these kinds of cell phones seem to be transcending what we associate as the financial means to acquire them. What is the financial means to acquire them? I have seen that from the working classes to the rich kids, I see these phones. That does not undo, of course, the inequalities, but I do see this technology traveling in ways that are surprising. Now, given this context, I just wonder the work of the humanities. The digital humanities may be an answer for that. Now, is that a whiteboard I can use? Is the video people happy with me using a whiteboard? All right. So to abstract a little bit from what I just said, one way that is useful for folks coming to this for the first time is to more or less think about the practice as two overlapping circles. Between what I call algorithmic approaches to corpora and knowledge architectures. Overlapping because here in the middle there's a lot of fruitful space All right. Just to explain this first, algorithmic approaches to Cooper refers to that example I used about how to read $1,000 without reading one, right? And so we use algorithms in the computer, we use software scripts in the computer in order to detect patterns in cultural artifacts at scale. At different scales, because we can even use the same algorithms to detect patterns within just one novel, if that's what we wanted. On the other side is, of course, the design of these new libraries, the designs of these new distribution channels, the designs of the objects that carry our research with them that will travel through these cables and reach those phones, that will reach our laptops. And somewhere in the middle, because sometimes we use the careful design of these environments to more or less communicate to both scholarly and general audiences the results of our algorithmic work with the computer. And one can do one without the other. This is perfectly feasible. But it is the combined activities of these two that has come to be known as digital humanities in 2018 around the world. The term itself comes from a volume published in the United States and Canada in the beginning of the century. It's a collection of essays compiled by a group of people that belong to a tradition called humanities computing. This tradition can be dated, and their own stories about themselves can be dated to the end of World War II, when some intrepid humanists began to ask those who had access to the mainframe computers in those days to give a little bit of computing time to the cultural artifacts they cared about. This is mostly a European tradition, continued to be a European and a North American tradition until late into the 90s. Well, this process of this scientific tradition that only those who had access to mainframe computers, later to really powerful university computers and research grants, they maintained a small community of people, a small number of journals, and a small number of conferences in order to share their work. And throughout that time, most of the work that was done using the computers was done on the canonical texts of the European-born traditions. That does not mean there weren't alternative traditions that were being born throughout that period that do not belong to them. When they baptized the digital humanities as such in that volume, there seems to be an explosion. Many other traditions feel they relate to the type of work that is being done. Many new genealogies, possible genealogies of what digital humanities is, start to be written. It was hilarious. For the past 5 years, actually the past 7 or 8 years, I have worked in an organization called Global Outlook Digital Humanities that gave itself the task, I was one of the founders, and it gave itself the task to go out there into the world and meet as many fellow travelers as possible. And I had an experience very similar to the Comintern in the Soviet Union when they went out onto the world to find fellow travelers. Came back from India in one of those first trips and said, "Oh, they're communists over there, they just don't call it that." Well, when I went around the world, many fellow travelers in South America, in Africa, in Asia, East Asia, Eastern Europe, they have been doing this. They just haven't been calling it that. Now it is very clear that this is a practice of planetary scale. Scholars harness the tools, have been harnessing the tools for decades from all kinds of traditions to perform both of those, to both present their materials to the world in new ways and to understand those materials using the power of the computer. My dream, always as a kid, was to be able to nurture such practices in the Caribbean. This is why bringing me here is an honor to me and a dream come true. Because seeing the work that you guys are doing here is without my presence, is sort of a validation of my life's work. Now, I'll save all the misty-eyed stuff for the public lecture. Let's focus on the, so this is one way. Right? Another way to look at it is from the point of view of labor, the point of view of what it means to be a scholar. What kind of labor does a scholar do? I had this conversation with the dean yesterday. There's two things we do in the university. Right? We produce two things. We produce subjects, so we produce sort of young adults to go out there and be fruitful, full subjects in the society. But we also produce scholarship. We produce ourselves what I call the, we can minimize this so that it doesn't distract. We produce subjects, but we also produce scholarship, what I call the scholarly record, the archive, and which we can consider to be part of the cultural record writ large, and those two kind of blend into each other. We not only produce it, we also have a mandate to the society at large to steward it into the future. So not only do we build it, we must guard it. And this is something that universities around the world have in common. We are not the only ones, certainly, but this is certainly central to what we do. Now, I was trained, my doctorate is in poetry, in an English literature department. I worked with French poetry, but as a materialist. I was trained in the art of editing literary texts, producing variorum editions, etc. Digging deep into the archives in order to understand the material realities in which those texts were born. So it was an easy jump for me to go from there to the digital humanities, because the material reality of our production today is hybrid. Let me put it to you in these terms. How many of you still write by hand your books and your essays? Brave. Two brave souls over here. And, yeah, three. Most of our work today is born digital. Just let that sink in for a second. Your scholarship is born digital. It can be pulped, but the publishers ask you to send a digital file to them. That means, in a sense, that we are in a hybrid world of print and digital. As I keep repeating this, but it's important to understand. The scholarly record today is hybrid, both print and digital. Not only do the publishers now pulp it, they will transform that Microsoft Word document into another file format, probably a PDF or an ebook, and then they will actually sell that back to the libraries of the world, or license it, as they do these days, for you to be able to access scholarship either as bytes or as print. Now this is, this hybridity is another entry point into understanding the digital humanities as an intervention in the labor of how we go about building this hybrid world. It is an intervention and not simply a parallel activity to what we do on any given business day as usual, because most of the hybrid production of the world today is controlled by large monopolies. financial cartels that are tied to the worst impulses of global capitalism. The companies, I was looking at the, why is the worst of neoliberalism? I was looking at some of the licenses that you purchased here in the library, and we were talking about this with the parents yesterday. So one of the companies that you deal with is Proquest. Proquest started as a microfilm company in the 1990s. They were in the business of converting some of the print record into microfilm. So to sell that to libraries instead of making print copies of the text. It was cheaper for libraries to buy microfilm. And this is, I was doing research already in the 90s, so I was doing the thing with the microfilm back then. And of course, from there, they went into the business of indexing. They already had distribution channels to all the libraries. When personal computers and the internet, when the internet arrived, personal computers had arrived in the 80s. They saw an opportunity, as several other companies did, to take advantage of those distribution channels and those relationships they had built with global libraries in order to now become powerhouses in the distribution of scholarship, not through microfilm, but through digital files. The effect on the academy has been very deleterious. Academy, because of the siloing of universities and libraries from each other and their inability to collaborate, which continues to be a reality. Libraries were not able to catch up with a private company that had the freedom to hire and fire as they please programmers in order to develop the systems that you use today in order to access other people's scholarship. So digital humanities is an intervention because digital humanity operates outside of these large monopolies to produce a scholarly record on a different key. And it is true that it doesn't come without its own privilege and its own flaws and sins. That global community of people practicing this range from the ultra-conservative jerks to the super idealistic revolutionary guerrilla tactics scholars. There's two ways already to look at digital humanities. One is combination of these things, which is the genres that we see. Another is the labor question. Producing a hybrid record that has another labor arrangement than the labor arrangement of the companies that are producing and owning most of the scholarly output of the global academy, today, including the Caribbean. Okay. Third, there we go, number 3. Digital humanities is what happens when you give a bunch of humanists computers and let them play free. It ain't free. So this is something that came up yesterday too in the conversation. At least for me, the way I see it, and this is something important, it's not only about us using computers in order to both interpret the record and to create a hybrid record of our own and own it, and then use algorithms and computers in order to interpret that record at different scales. I think it's also us bringing our humanistic training into the understanding of the role of technology today in our society. In the production not only of the scholarly record, but of the culture itself. And in a very real way, as Marx used to say, the point is not to understand it, the point is to change it. I think that's not an exact quote, but he didn't write in English. So it's not only about us learning from the computer scientists and the engineers. So thank you guys for now we can finally be moderns too, like you guys. No, it's about them learning from us. It has been, the planet right now is suffering enormously because of the training, of the way that the education of engineers and computer scientists was set up. They have very little access to us, to our art, to our music, to our history, to our anthropology, to our cultural studies. And what happened? We end up with Silicon Valley and Facebook in front of the United States Senate after causing the election of Trump. He wasn't aware of the Cambridge Analytica had the data. All of us who understood how the machines work and were watching that, it was embarrassing on both sides to watch that because the senators had no clue what was really going on with the computers. And he, of course, was able to get away with saying things that nobody who had a training in both the art of politics, purview of the humanities, sorry, social sciences, and the art of computing would have not let him get away. So we're not here only to receive the gift of the computing gods. We are here actually to question the gods. And to perhaps create universities in which this stops. In which the training of our engineers and our computer scientists, and our scientists in general, let me add, this whole Frankenstein story is as old as get exposure to us. We can only, of course, have that, we can only command that attention if we ourselves understand. There's another way of looking at digital humanities. In fact, this one is super useful when you're trying to create an educational program around digital humanities, right? So, another way of looking at digital humanities. And it's linked to this other digital humanities is not a field. And we have fields already. We have history, we have English literature, we have anthropology. These are fields. How can you have a field that actually where people from all those other fields participating? What is this field? The only field that I know that allows the inclusion of all other fields is philosophy. And digital humanities is not philosophy. But of course, we have to pretend it's a field if we're going to have a program, right? It's a little bit of a game of language that we work with administrators. And of course, I wouldn't be here if the illusion of a field wasn't there. And perhaps we can talk about a field or use the metaphor of a field if we understand a field as a landscape. If we go back to its original spatial connotations. It's dangerous because colonialism doesn't stand too far behind when we start talking about fields. So here's my alternative. I mean, please, by all means, if you're going to get that money calling it a field, do it. But here's the alternative. The digital humanities is an opportunity for us to renegotiate the social contract of the universe. As a Caribbean man, I've always been who grew up in who had access to the university in the Dominican Republic, where I grew up, and then went through the American system to study Caribbean history and culture, understand our destiny from the slave societies until the present. I've always been impressed by how immune the souls of academics are to the fact that the universities are still run both in the Caribbean and in the United States as plantations. It's like we learn how to, we gotta survive somehow, right? So we make it happen somehow. We work that soul to make it happen. Is that, we have the plantation owner right here at the top, and then the overseers of different ranks. So the digital humanities, another way of looking at the digital humanities, is an opportunity for us to renegotiate the social contract of the university. And here's why. It's impossible to do most of these things unless you collaborate with each other. You can't be the individual genius. It is true that some of us spend a lot of time in solitude studying something, and that we become experts. That we cannot deny that, and we learn how to become really knowledgeable about certain areas. It takes a lot of work, and you can't pretend that work wasn't there. or you can pretend that somebody who hasn't done that work can speak to the things that you work on the same way that you can. That is true. An unwanted effect of that, though, is that we become sort of isolated and individual in that work by necessity. Well, guess what's almost impossible to do unless you collaborate with others? Digital humanities. It's very rare to have somebody that has the capacity to get one of these projects off the ground working by himself or herself. And even those that pretend that they do depend on the work of librarians and technologists who don't make it to the acknowledgements, who don't make it to the credits page, the about page on the website. In fact, those of us who have written books and essays and stuff like that forget that even though that work won you alone, it took a lot of teams to get that up the ground. The people who were super happy to take it backstage to that did so at 30% profit margin, and that is the publishing cartels. I mean, I'll do it too for 30% profit margin. But what is really hard is to do these kinds of things when you want to, when you don't have the big resources of super famous faculty, you have access to these kinds of things. And most of the work that is being done with Goodman's is done by teams composed of librarians, technologists, somebody from computer science maybe, and then 3 faculty from the humanities, and about 10 graduate students, and maybe 2 undergraduates. This is how it's done. And guess what? When you walk into that collaboration and you learn that a 20-year-old may not know all the things that you know, having spent your life studying it, but they know some things that you don't. And the librarian definitely knows some things that you don't. It's very different to become a specialist than to become a generalist, which is what librarians are. Very different skills. So you can't do this without collaboration. So therefore, there's an opportunity here to reimagine what that means in the university, to collaborate across the hierarchies. In our lab on Fridays from 3 to 5 for the past 5 years, you have to leave the hierarchy outside. We do not forget about it. We do not forget the hierarchies of the world: empire, colonialism, racism, the patriarchy. We don't forget them. But we close that door. We are a little small community. It's an alternative way of being. And we reflect that in the way that we work, in the way that we publish, in the way that we credit each other. In fact, we encourage our faculty that work with us, we do it ourselves, to put our names at the bottom of the page, because we don't need it that much. As the young scholars, emerging scholars, undergrad and graduate students that are coming up the pipeline. Okay, so what was that? 4 ways of looking at digital humanities? Let me just say with that last one, because you are thinking about, like, how do we think about digital humanities as a program? You won't have a program unless you learn how to work yourselves in the modalities of digital humanities. Unless you learn how to do that practice of collaboration, you won't be able to teach it. So, I mean, if I have any wisdom to offer, is that. This is why it has been very heartening to see the way that this is being this is being planned and talked about. The fact that we're all here in this room together, the fact that actually I have seen constituencies. I saw IT, I saw the task force, and I saw a group of librarians yesterday, all on the table in a dialogue. How can we do this together? This is super brilliant, very encouraging, because this is exactly what you want to do. You know who you might want to also talk to? The students. I didn't meet with no students, but you know they're gonna bring some skills to the table that you don't have. And that goes to everybody. IT, librarians, deans, talk to them. And then you can start with the graduate students. They're kind of like already our colleagues, in essence. They've earned their place at the table already. All right. 4 ways of looking at the documents. Now, because I know I tend to talk and I don't stop. What are we?
10:30.
10:30. We're supposed to go until 10:30?
11.
11. So I have half an hour. Okay. The exercise. We're gonna begin the exercise. I'm going to go through a series of digital projects. Forget about the digital cameras. Let's not use the word. That word, it's not going to be helpful. Forget about this. What we're going to look at it is a bunch of projects that exist online that deal with American slavery. In some cases, they're hemispheric in scope. In other cases, they focus on the United States. These projects I'm about to show you traverse the genres. They traverse that flow between algorithmic approaches and knowledge architectures. All right? I want you to, if possible, as I'm going to be presenting projects and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about them. All right? I want you to take notes about what you see, what you think you see. I can share also, I have a USB with all the links. If anybody wants to have all those links later, I can just, they're written in a small text file that you can just copy the text file into your computer and then you can open up those links later for you to look at these projects. And we can pass them to the people watching at home, not at home.
I can distribute through the heads of department.
To the heads of departments. I can pass you these links so you can have them as reference points for the exercise later. I want you to take notes about what you see, things that catch your attention. I don't want you to forget, in fact, I want you to even forget this model or any of the 4 ways in which I define digital humanities. I just want us to go back to the beginning of my comments today. I want you to think about the scholarly and the cultural work. This is all I want you to think about for this exercise. All right. Now this is not my own computer, so in my own computer I can just open them all at once. Here it's going to be a little tricky. And in fact, I think I even lost the file. It's in the desktop? There it is. All right. Let me put this in. Let's open the first one. Is this connected to the internet? This doesn't seem to be connected to the internet. That will put a damper on the exercise. It's kind of my fault because I didn't ask about the setup and I should have been a little bit more attentive to show it up a little earlier to make sure that my computer was working with it. Can you just check if the internet itself is working? Just Google something random and see if it's working. Because the exercise is like it's like 1.5 years old, so some of the links might actually not work.
Peter, can you just Google Berkeley, what does it say, slave narratives? Just Google that because perhaps the site will quite great attention.
Yeah, so Google is working? No, there is no connection to the internet. Oh, this is sad. I mean, it's so important for us to actually look at many examples, because I can just give you theory here all day long and make it entertaining, but without examples, we're not. Well, look at the terminal, yay.
Alice, we can use our phones individually because we have Wi-Fi.
These links, well, yeah, sure, but these links sometimes are so complicated, like super long with a bunch of weird alphanumerical characters. But sure, everybody has his phone. Let's do this. Why not? This is a career, man. We gotta improvise. I'm gonna use Flow. I got my Flow signal here, but I can't believe it's all Flow. All right. First project. Google. In fact, my public lecture is going to be touching upon a lot upon this sort of Caribbean improvisation.
Yes.
So here we go.
I'm not getting
It's on the iPad.
I'm connected to internet access and yet
So Google Word Seer, all one word. If you have somebody next to you that has a computer or a phone that is working, feel free to reach out. Word Seer. The slave narratives. Just Google Word Seer, one word. Seer, like a visionary seer. Word Seer, space, slave narratives. Google that. You should hit. Mine is still loading, but you should hit a website at Berkeley. Word. Right in the beginning of the word. Seer. S-E-E-R. Word seer. One word. All that together is one word. Word seer. W-O-R-D-S-E-E-R. One word.
Monoconnect is not working. For anyone who depends on Monoconnect, it's not working.
Yeah, you should find a Google link. Well, I will show you. Yeah, examples. Word seer, slave narratives. Let me see.
Can we use?
That's the one, yeah.
Can we plug this in?
Can you plug that one in? That one's working.
Like it's a PC.
Yeah, that would be perfect, and then I can just use the USB to transfer the stuff.
I have
This computer is working. Can you just get this, and it's already connected to the internet? Thank you very much.
Should I just answer this? And plug
Word
it in?
seer.
Is that okay with you?
No, it's not. It's not.
But this is never going to work?
W-O-R-D-S-E-E-R.
No, that's not the issue. We're live streaming,
I understand.
so
But how can
we could actually use his laptop. So it's not a matter of getting this to work. We could use your laptop.
So we cannot use that one?
No, problem is not that. This is the internet. It's
it's live
accessible on
No, but the live stream, I'm sorry people in the live stream, but we gotta do the exercise. I'm gonna try to tell you what to Google.
So I'm saying I switched to your laptop.
Because so that we at least can get most of the people in this room at least seeing on the screen what it is that we're doing. Hopefully at home you will be able to find the websites that I'm going to show. And we'll make sure to circulate the actual links so you can watch them later. Thank you. So, and is this connected to the internet already?
Yeah, man, that's what we're using.
Perfect, brilliant. Let's open this. Let's open this up then.
You got
It's gonna try to open 1,000,000 at once.
Seeing something like that.
Yeah. Oh, cause I gotta drag this. Yeah, just make it dark here and leave it. Let me see if I can drag this.
Master, huh?
Hold on a second. It's actually, this computer is not connected to the internet.
It's not connected now. It was connected earlier.
Mona eye test seems to be working, Peter.
Yeah, it was connected earlier, but let me check it.
Yours is working already. Ah, I know.
That's it.
Thank you. Actually, let me. I need to do this another way. All right, here we go. All right, this is the one. All right, so what is this project? First one, Word Series, developed at Berkeley by a computer scientist, doctoral student, Aditi, I can never pronounce her name. Yeah, I'm not gonna try. By a doctoral graduate student at Berkeley. Working on a digital collection of on a digital collection of slave narratives from the United States. This is a genre that blooms in the end of the 18th century and then throughout the first half of the 19th century in the United States. And what she did is she did a syntactical analysis. You're the linguist, so correct me if I use any of these words wrong. She did work what I knew as a kid as grammar trees. Like, I don't know if you in school here they do make kids go through this obstacle course with us. You get a sentence and then you're like noun, adjective, verb, and then you get a tree sentence, right? So she did this kind of work the way it's done today in corpus linguistics with this body of work in order to help design an interface that allows us to understand how adjectives and nouns are related to each other, how adverbs are related to verbs, etc. So in this one example, for example, we can search. You get your typical search box, except these are two search boxes with one relationship menu in the middle. You can say the word overseer described as cruel, and then you get in the text the places in which an overseer is described as cruel. But more than that, you can find out, for example, who is described as cruel. Not only the overseer, but we get all the words associated with cruel here. We got treatment, master, man, master's bondage, etc., etc. And one of the examples that she uses, I don't know if she uses it here in this description, that she actually wanted to know what adjectives were used to describe God, and she found great, awesome, etc. So, very interesting result. God is still praised. There's moments of darkness and oppression. So that's this project. Okay. Next project. All right. This project you cannot access on your computers, perhaps. Maybe you can. This project is accessible to me as an officer of Columbia University. This is an article on JSTOR. Also, you do have a JSTOR subscription. Yes. So you should be able to access this one. This one is an essay in Gender and Society called Controlling Images and the Gender Construction of Enslaved African Women by Rupi Sims. I don't think I need to gloss this. I imagine you have seen this type of work. The next one is a Project Gutenberg edition of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, which is one of the canonical texts in the United States canon. Is this text read here? Yeah. So this in the Gutenberg edition, probably done in the 90s, since this is when Project Gutenberg was most active. You get different versions: HTML, EPUB, Kindle, plain text, even other file types of this text. All right. This is Mystical Passage, a voyage to 1688 Jamaica. How many of you have seen this already? Yeah, one person. All right. This is a project done at Duke University. Collaboration with some Jamaican musicians. So some scholars working in Jamaica, working at Duke University, working with some artists here in Jamaica. This project, can you hear it? It's a recreation of one of the earliest, if not the earliest, slave songs recorded in the archive. Now, of course, one of the things that it allows you to do is do this kind of allows this interaction with the text. Has many other features, many other things you can do. There was also an exercise in collective annotation around the world in which scholars from Jamaica, other universities in the Caribbean and the United States and Europe participated in a discussion of the manuscript. I'm going to go ahead and mute that. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close this one. If we need to open it just for the sound, so that. This one is Slave Voyages. In fact, I'm going to close the other ones because, I mean, part of the narrative you may be observing here, if you are observant, is that loading symbol. That loading symbol tells a story too. This is Slave Voyages. They build themselves as the largest database of slave trade related materials. This is a project that started as a print project. It was, it's almost like 3 decades if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on this, I know I'm on film. Many years in the making, started out projected as a series of volumes. Then it became a project projected as CD-ROM. Back in the 90s, libraries used to get those CD-ROMs. We should still be doing that. It's a shame that we moved away from that. The for-profit companies are benefiting from this Netflix obsession we have. So we rent knowledge instead of buying it. The CD-ROMs, at least you had it.
We had it here at the time.
Yeah, you had it's right. Now you don't have anything. You just rent access. It's a Netflix model, right? You get a year subscription, give you a discount. So here's the sorry. Here's the Digital Library of American Slavery. Project done at the University of North, you can't read it there, at the University of North Carolina, based on their special collections. This was done by librarians with their special collections. Sorry, I forgot to mention that the Voyages website is a multinational collaboration amongst many institutions. Much labor of different varieties went into it, as you can imagine. It is a massive project. This is a slightly smaller project done by librarians at the University of North Carolina. Photographs, manuscripts, etc. This is Unknown No Longer. A very similar project, except this time is a historical society, which is a sort of parallel to universities. I don't know, do you have I imagine you have historical societies here in Jamaica, right? So many of them, there's collaboration with the universities and the historical societies. This is based on their collection in Virginia. This is very similar project again. Sorry, it's just that it takes a little time to load. I'm actually going to try to open a few of them at the same time. Here in the back end while we talk about this one. This is very similar, but this one is a tourist destination. This is in the United States. The so-called founding fathers have their houses visited by thousands and thousands of visitors each year, and they have their own collections. The papers usually of that historical figure. And what we have here is the ones for George Washington's special collection, built into a very similar project. Here is a very similar project again, this time by Gail Cengage. Now, I noticed in your collections that you license that some of those collections are actually produced by this company, Gale Stenkage. So middle of the road, definitely don't count as a global monopoly of anything. They specialize in specific research collections of primary resources, and then license them or sell them to libraries. A very similar company is Redex, which is responsible for this project, which is loading now. There's another middle-of-the-road company specializing in primary resources, slightly a little bit more problematic than Gale Stenkage. The way this works is, of course, they will get 1 or 2 scholar volunteers to help them more or less identify a collection, and they will go about the business of digitizing the collections and then providing the metadata and then selling the package to libraries. In some of these cases, some of the work of transcription or photography is done in Southeast Asia or in Asia. The labor has become really cheap in what are called mechanical Turks in order to do some of this work. Have you guys seen, for example, those images going around of the black hands on the Google Books documents? If I can, well, during the break, I'll pull one of these up. But this is some of these labor is made cheaper by some of these companies because they can then outsource to cheap labor in the global south. I actually don't know if this company specifically uses that practice, but I would not be surprised. What I do want you to notice is the way that they frame the collection. Now, after I was running this exercise like about a year ago for a new batch of CLIR postdoc scholars in the United States, that sentence read one of the most controversial topics in American history. Now we're talking about genocide, and they refer to it as controversial subject in the United States. We call that the Fox News effect. You know, there's 2 sides to the story. You know, yeah, some people will say it's bad, but some people will say it's good. And of course, they were playing that game. Of course, somebody tweeted as I pointed this out, and with their tag, and then called them out in public, and then like 2 hours later, they had changed it to one of the most important. So there's a way to commit to a good friend, right? Yeah, the word important doesn't mean anything anymore. So again, they have a large collection of these materials. Here is a 3-dimensional reconstruction. Now we're moving away from this type of genre. This is a 3-dimensional reconstruction of the slave market in Richmond. I just play a little bit of the video. It's probably not going to play that much. Yeah, there you go. But I'm sure you've seen this kind of 3D reconstructions of cities and Google Maps and this kind of stuff where you can, on Google Earth, where you can walk through the city. Just years-long work of reconstructing from historical records, architectural records.
Most of those people were bought and sold in the domestic slave market. Nope.
All right, I'll stop there. You get to zoom in. Actually, this is the video part. There's a part in which it works like a video game where you can walk. All right. Here is A Tale of Two Plantations by Vincent Brown, Harvard, who has Mona roots, and a professor of history at Harvard, Vincent Brown, was reimagining the work of a scholar, a white scholar that came before him, who, based on years and years of research, tried to reconstruct family trees. Now what Professor Brown and his team, the History Design Studio at Harvard, tried to do was try to imagine the society not as family trees, but using modern technology, reimagine what a database is in order to try to present a different concept of that will capture more the horrors of the time. As opposed, as the family tree has a sort of cleansing effect, the reassurance that there is families that operate more or less and are imagined more or less in the way that we imagine the bourgeois family today. So this is a reimagination of the database. The different reconstructions of the ways of the same data, different reconstructions of it that push against the family tree. All right, so here is the sound you hear in the background is the knotted line. This is a scholarly, artistic attempt at reconstructing the history of unfreedom in the United States. This is interactive like a video game. You have to discover history by moving the mouse around, and then history opens up in the sort of graphic design. And of course, it will take forever to load, but I'm doing some clicking here to try to discover things. And then there's, inside the discoveries, there will be links that will take you to documents of unfreedom from the times of slavery until the time of mass incarceration that we live in today, without necessarily making, the claims that, for example, films like The 13th make. I don't know if you're familiar with this film here.
Thanks to Netflix.
Yeah, it's on Netflix, yeah. Without trying to make these kind of connections that we never really left the slave society. Here is, to conclude, because I only have 1 minute, and I do have to give you a prompt. So I won't go through everything. I would have loved to show you the Wikipedia article, Google search results, but I'll just finish with this project by Dr. Jessica Johnson. Has Caribbean roots. I was born and raised in New Orleans, and is one of our most promising and exciting scholars of slavery, American slavery today. She runs a Tumblr and a digital humanist. She runs a Tumblr called African Diaspora PhD, in which she captures every new bit of scholarship that makes it online on American slavery, and just continuously aggregates it to the Tumblr. So let me minimize this. She's constantly just adding, both from the culture and from the scholarly record, she's constantly adding reflection, our modern reflection of American slavery. All right, I'll end there. And here's your prompt. Here's your mission impossible. Choose to accept. I told you to, while we were doing this, to forget about digital humanities, forget about it. So what I want you to discuss, and I hope you took notes, what I want you to discuss is which one of these reflects, for you, would be part of the digital humanities you want. And which one of these should be excluded from that digital humanities. And I want you to think about why. Now, when I usually do this exercise, I usually ask the workshop attendants to think about which one is, which one would you like it to be. Today is the first time that I actually propose it that way. Because I have become less interested in trying to define digital humanities. More interested in understanding how the scholarly record works today, and dreaming together what we would like that scholarly record to be in the future, if we learn ourselves how to build it ourselves. So this is why in the next hour, when you go to your lunch, discuss which ones would you like to be included in that scholarly records, and which one you want to be excluded, and why. Another important question and I want you to ask is, who owns what? In what, everything that I've shown you, who owns the history of American slavery in the digital world? See you in an hour. Didn't mean to depress you, everybody. What? I'll turn up the microphone.
All right, thank you everybody for being here so far. I hope we're going to see you back in about an hour's time, and that you'll have the time to actually consider these questions, because after the break, I think we're going to get into a lot more detail about what it is that we can see the digital humanities to be. So we'll see you in about an hour's time. Thank you.